The Boy Who Learned to Stand Alone. Beirut, Lebanon, 1964. A baby boy opens his eyes for the first time in a city that smells of cedar trees and Mediterranean salt. His name is Keanu, a Hawaiian word meaning cool breeze over the mountains. His mother, Patricia Taylor, holds him close, whispering dreams into his tiny ears. She's young, barely in her 20s, with fire in her heart and hope in her eyes. She has no idea that life is about to test her in ways she never imagined. Patricia wasn't born into wealth or privilege. She grew up in England, a working-class girl who discovered her passion for fashion and costume design. She had dreams of creating beautiful things, of dressing movie stars, of building something meaningful with her own two hands. When she met Keanu's father, Keanu Reeves, she believed she had found her partner in that journey. But some people are not meant to stay. Samuel was a complicated man. Charming when he wanted to be, distant when it mattered most. By the time Keanu was 3 years old, Samuel had walked out of their lives completely. No goodbye. No explanation. Just silence where a father should have been. Patricia watched the door close behind him, and something inside her shifted. She didn't break. She couldn't afford to break. She had a son depending on her now. The years that followed were a blur of movement and survival. Patricia packed their bags and moved, first to Australia, then to New York, and finally to Toronto, Canada. Each city brought new challenges, new faces, and new struggles. Patricia worked tirelessly, taking any job she could find in the entertainment industry. She sewed costumes late into the night. She ironed fabrics until her fingers burned. She smiled through exhaustion because she knew her son was watching. And Keanu was watching. Always watching. He saw his mother come home at midnight, her shoulders heavy with fatigue but her spirit unbroken. He saw her count coins on the kitchen table, calculating whether they could afford groceries that week. He saw her sacrifice meals so he could eat. And though he was just a child, something was being carved into his soul, a deep understanding that love isn't just words. Love is what you do when no one is watching. Love is showing up, again and again, even when the world gives you every reason to quit. But Patricia's journey wasn't just about survival. It was about refusing to let circumstances define her son's future. She enrolled Keanu in good schools, even when it meant working double shifts. She encouraged his curiosity, his creativity, his quiet sensitivity. When other kids teased him for being the new student, again, she would sit beside him at night and tell him stories about resilience, about people who turned their pain into purpose. Keanu, she would say, her voice gentle but firm, life will knock you down. It will take things from you. But it can never take who you are inside. You decide that. Not the world. Those words planted seeds that would bloom decades later. By the time Keanu was a teenager, Patricia had established herself as a respected costume designer in Hollywood. She dressed rock stars like Dolly Parton and David Bowie. She worked on film sets, bringing characters to life through fabric and thread. And through it all, she remained devoted to her children, Keanu and his younger sister, Kim. But even as their lives stabilized, Patricia carried invisible scars. The abandonment, the years of struggle, the loneliness of raising children without a partner. She never complained, never sought pity. She simply kept moving forward, teaching her son through action what it means to be strong without being hard, to be kind without being weak. Keanu absorbed every lesson. He watched his mother treat everyone with respect, from studio executives to cleaning staff. He saw her give money to strangers who needed it more. He noticed how she never spoke badly about his father, even though she had every right to. And slowly, piece by piece, the foundation of the man he would become was being built. By 17, Keanu had found his own dream, acting. The shy, quiet boy who once struggled to fit in had discovered something magical about becoming other people, about telling stories, about connecting with audiences through raw emotion. When he told his mother he wanted to drop out of high school to pursue acting full-time, most parents would have panicked. Patricia didn't panic. She looked at her son, this young man with gentle eyes and a pure heart, and she saw something special. Not because he was talented, though he was, but because she knew he had the one thing that talent alone cannot provide: integrity. If this is your dream, she told him, then chase it with everything you have. But remember, fame will come and go. Money will come and go. The only thing that stays with you forever is how you treat people. Keanu never forgot those words. He left home with almost nothing, a few $100s, a backpack, and his mother's blessing. He took a bus to Los Angeles, the city of broken dreams and impossible miracles. He slept on couches. He auditioned for roles he didn't get. He faced rejection after rejection, each one stinging more than the last. But every time he felt like giving up, he remembered his mother. He remembered her counting coins at midnight. He remembered her sewing costumes until her fingers bled. He remembered her smile, even when there was nothing to smile about. If she could survive, so could he. And then, just when the darkness felt thickest, a phone call came that would change everything. When dreams collide with reality. Los Angeles, 1986. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Keanu was sitting in a cramped apartment he shared with two other struggling actors, staring at a script he had memorized so many times the words had lost all meaning. The audition was tomorrow. Another small role, another chance to prove himself, another opportunity that would probably lead nowhere. When the phone rang, he almost didn't answer. But something made him reach for it. Keanu. His agent's voice was different. Excited. Almost breathless. You got it. You got the role. For a moment, the world stopped spinning. The role was in a film called River's Edge, a dark, gritty drama that critics were already buzzing about. It wasn't the lead, but it was significant. It was the kind of role that could open doors, the kind that separated working actors from forgotten ones. Keanu hung up the phone and sat in silence for what felt like hours. Then he did the only thing that felt right. He called his mother. Patricia answered on the second ring, as if she had been waiting. When he told her the news, her voice cracked, not with sadness, but with something deeper. Pride. Relief. Vindication. All those years of sacrifice, all those nights of wondering if she had done enough, if she had given her son the tools he needed to survive in this brutal world, it was all worth it in that single moment. I knew it, she whispered through tears. I always knew you had something special, Keanu. Not because of talent, because of your heart. That conversation stayed with him forever. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Patricia didn't talk about herself. She didn't mention the years of struggle, the loneliness, the exhaustion. She only talked about him, about his future, about how proud she was. In that moment, Keanu understood something profound about his mother. She had never been living for herself. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear she had hidden, it was all for him and his sister. The success of River's Edge led to more opportunities. Suddenly, casting directors who had ignored Keanu's headshots were calling his agent. He booked roles in bigger films, worked alongside established actors, and slowly began building a reputation as someone different, someone genuine in an industry built on facades. But Hollywood is a complicated place. It rewards talent, yes, but it also tests character in ways most people never experience. Keanu watched colleagues lose themselves to drugs, ego, and the intoxicating poison of fame. He saw friendships dissolve over jealousy. He witnessed marriages crumble under the pressure of spotlight and scrutiny. And through it all, he kept hearing his mother's voice in his head. Fame will come and go. Money will come and go. The only thing that stays with you forever is how you treat people. He clung to those words like a lifeline. By 1989, Keanu's career had reached a new level. He starred in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, a quirky comedy that became a surprise hit. Suddenly, he wasn't just a working actor, he was a movie star. His face was on magazine covers. Fans recognized him on the street. Money flowed in faster than he knew how to spend it. And the first thing he did with that money was take care of his mother. Patricia had spent her entire adult life taking care of others. She had given everything she had to her children, often at the expense of her own comfort and happiness. Now, for the first time, Keanu could give back. He bought her a beautiful home. He made sure she never had to worry about bills again. He called her every week, sometimes every day, just to hear her voice. But even as his external world flourished, something was quietly breaking inside. Keanu had always been a sensitive soul, the kind of person who felt emotions more deeply than most. He carried the weight of his father's abandonment like an invisible anchor. He struggled with questions that had no answers. Why wasn't I enough? What did I do wrong? Would things have been different if he had stayed? Patricia saw this pain in her son, even when he tried to hide it. During one of their phone calls, she finally addressed it directly. "Keanu, I need you to hear something," she said, her voice steady and warm. "Your father leaving had nothing to do with you. Nothing. Some people are broken in ways that make them unable to love properly. It's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of his limitations." Keanu was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, he asked the question that had haunted him for decades. "Do you hate him, Mom?" Patricia's answer surprised him. "No," she said softly. "I don't have room for hate. Hate is heavy, and I've been carrying too much weight already. I made a choice a long time ago to focus on love. Love for you, love for Kim, love for the life we built together. Hate would have stolen energy I needed for more important things." That conversation changed something in Keanu. He had spent years unconsciously holding on to anger and resentment, letting it poison quiet moments and peaceful nights. Hearing his mother, the person who had the most right to be bitter, choose love over hate was a revelation. If she could do it after everything she endured, maybe he could too. The early 1990s brought even greater success. Point Break. Speed. Each film bigger than the last. Keanu became one of the most sought-after actors in Hollywood, commanding millions per picture. But unlike many of his peers, he remained grounded. He took the subway. He gave up his seat for strangers. He had lunch with crew members instead of retreating to his trailer. People in the industry noticed. They whispered about it. Who is this guy? Why isn't he acting like a star? The answer was simple. Patricia Taylor had raised him better than that. But life, as it always does, was preparing another test. One that would shake the foundation of everything Keanu believed about family, love, and the cruel randomness of fate. It started with a phone call from his sister, Kim. Her voice was trembling. Scared. The kind of scared that makes your blood run cold before a single word is spoken. "Keanu," she said, barely above a whisper. "Something's wrong with me. The doctors, they found something." In that moment, the movie star disappeared. The fame, the money, the magazine covers, none of it mattered. There was only a brother, standing in his kitchen, feeling the ground collapse beneath his feet. Leukemia. His baby sister had leukemia. And nothing in his life had prepared him for what came next. The weight that breaks and builds. The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and false hope. Keanu sat in a plastic chair, staring at a crack in the linoleum floor, trying to remember how to breathe. Somewhere behind those white doors, his sister Kim was lying in a bed, her body betraying her in ways that seemed impossibly cruel. Leukemia. The word kept echoing in his mind, sharp and relentless, like a knife turning slowly in his chest. He had faced rejection. He had faced poverty. He had faced the abandonment of a father who chose absence over love. But this, watching someone he loved fight for her life, was a different kind of pain entirely. This was the kind that hollowed you out from the inside, leaving nothing but raw, bleeding emptiness. Patricia arrived within hours of the diagnosis. She walked into that hospital with the same quiet strength she had carried her entire life, shoulders back, chin up, eyes clear despite the storm raging inside her. When she saw Keanu sitting in that corridor, she didn't say a word. She simply sat beside him, took his hand, and held it tight. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Decades of shared struggle, shared sacrifice, shared love had created a language between them that went beyond words. In that silence, they made a pact without ever saying it aloud. They would fight this together, no matter what it cost, no matter how long it took, no matter how dark the road became. The months that followed blurred together into an endless cycle of treatments, transfusions, and terrifying uncertainty. Kim's body responded to chemotherapy, then didn't, then did again. Hope became a fragile thing, something Keanu learned to hold gently, afraid that gripping too tight would shatter it completely. He put his career on hold. Studio executives called, offering roles that would have cemented his status as Hollywood's biggest star. He turned them down without hesitation. His agent warned him about momentum, about timing, about the brutal truth that Hollywood forgets quickly. Keanu listened politely and then hung up the phone. His sister needed him. Nothing else mattered. Patricia, meanwhile, became Kim's constant guardian. She moved into her daughter's apartment, sleeping on a small cot beside her bed. She learned medical terminology that no mother should ever have to learn. She researched treatments, questioned doctors, advocated fiercely for her daughter's care. And through it all, she never once complained, never once asked why this was happening, never once surrendered to the despair that lurked at the edges of every single day. Keanu watched his mother during those months with something close to awe. Here was a woman who had already given everything, her youth, her dreams, her comfort, for her children. And now life was demanding even more. Yet she gave it without hesitation, without resentment, without keeping score. Her love wasn't conditional. It wasn't transactional. It simply was. One night, after a particularly brutal round of chemotherapy had left Kim weak and barely conscious, Keanu found his mother sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria. It was past midnight. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her face. She looked older than he had ever seen her, the lines around her eyes deeper, the weight of worry pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible mountain. He sat across from her and noticed something he had never seen before. His mother was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears streaming down her cheeks, falling into a cup of cold coffee she hadn't touched. "Mom," he whispered, his heart breaking in ways he didn't know were possible. Patricia looked up at him, and for the first time in his life, Keanu saw fear in her eyes. Real, raw, unfiltered fear. The kind that parents hide from their children because they believe their job is to be strong, to be unshakable, to be the foundation that never cracks. "I can't lose her, Keanu," she said, her voice barely audible. "I've survived everything. The abandonment, the poverty, the loneliness. But I cannot survive burying my child. I'm not strong enough for that." Keanu reached across the table and took her hands in his. They were trembling. These hands that had sewn costumes until they bled, that had held him when he was scared, that had built an entire life from nothing but determination and love. Now they trembled like leaves in a storm. "You won't have to," he said, even though he didn't know if it was true. "We are going to fight this together. And Kim is strong. She learned that from you." Patricia squeezed his hands and nodded, pulling herself back from the edge of despair. In that moment, something shifted between them. They were no longer just mother and son. They were partners, equals in the battle against an enemy that cared nothing for love or fairness or the desperate prayers whispered in hospital chapels at 3 in the morning. The battle lasted nearly a decade. 10 years of treatments, remissions, relapses, and countless moments of terror followed by fragile relief. Kim fought with a courage that inspired everyone around her. She refused to let the disease define her, continuing to live, to laugh, to find joy in small moments even when her body was ravaged by illness and medicine alike. And through every single day of those 10 years, Patricia was there. When Kim was too weak to walk, Patricia carried her. When Kim was too sick to eat, Patricia sat beside her, holding her hand, telling her stories about the future they would share when this nightmare was finally over. When Kim cried in the middle of the night, terrified of what tomorrow might bring, Patricia climbed into bed beside her and held her like she had when Kim was a baby, whispering that everything would be okay, that love was stronger than cancer, that she would never, ever face this alone. Keanu contributed in every way he could. He paid for the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, anything that might give his sister a fighting chance. But more importantly, he gave his time. He flew back and forth between film sets and hospital rooms, often arriving exhausted but never complaining. He read to Kim when she was too weak to hold a book. He made her laugh with terrible jokes that only siblings find funny. He reminded her, again and again, that she was loved beyond measure. Finally, in the early 2000s, the miracle they had prayed for arrived. Kim went into remission. The cancer that had terrorized their family for a decade retreated, beaten back by medicine and willpower and the kind of love that refuses to surrender. The day the doctors delivered the news, Keanu and Patricia held each other in the hospital parking lot and wept, tears of relief, of exhaustion, of gratitude so profound it felt like drowning. They had won. Against all odds, against the statistics, against the cruel randomness of a universe that seemed determined to break them, they had won. But victory, Keanu would soon learn, doesn't protect you from what comes next. Just as his family was finally healing, just as life was beginning to feel normal again, fate delivered another blow. This time, it wasn't cancer. It wasn't illness. It was something far more sudden, far more devastating, far more impossible to prepare for. Her name was Jennifer Syme, and she was carrying his child. When heaven takes more than you can give. Love found Keanu Reeves when he least expected it. Jennifer Syme walked into his life like a sudden summer storm, beautiful, passionate, full of wild energy that matched something restless inside him. She worked in the entertainment industry, but there was nothing artificial about her. She laughed loudly, loved fiercely, and saw past the movie star facade to the quiet, sensitive man hiding underneath. For the first time in his life, Keanu allowed himself to imagine a future beyond work and family obligation. He imagined marriage, children, a home filled with laughter and chaos and the kind of ordinary happiness he had watched other people enjoy from a distance. With Jennifer, those dreams felt possible. With Jennifer, the loneliness that had shadowed him since childhood finally began to lift. When she told him she was pregnant, Keanu wept. Not from fear or uncertainty, but from pure, overwhelming joy. He was going to be a father. After spending his entire life wondering why his own father had abandoned him, he would have the chance to do things differently. He would be present. He would be loving. He would give his child everything Samuel Reeves had failed to give him. He called his mother immediately. Patricia's reaction was exactly what he needed. She didn't ask practical questions about timing or readiness. She simply cried with happiness, her voice breaking as she told him how proud she was, how wonderful he would be as a father, how this child would be blessed to have him. "You're going to break the cycle, Keanu," she said through tears. "Everything your father did wrong, you're going to do right. I know it in my bones." The pregnancy progressed normally at first. Keanu and Jennifer decorated a nursery together, painting the walls a soft yellow, assembling a crib with instructions neither of them could fully understand. They argued playfully about names, about parenting philosophies, about whose family the baby would resemble. It was the happiest time of Keanu's life, a brief, golden window where everything seemed possible. They decided to name her Ava. Ava Archer-Sime Reeves. Keanu would whisper to Jennifer's growing belly at night, telling Ava stories about her grandmother Patricia, about the strength and resilience that ran through their family bloodline. He promised her adventures and bedtime stories and a father who would never, ever leave. Then came the 8th month. Jennifer noticed that something felt wrong. The baby wasn't moving as much. The kicks that had become a comforting rhythm had slowed, then stopped entirely. At first, they told themselves it was normal. Babies sleep. Babies have quiet days. Everything was fine. But everything was not fine. The doctor's face told them before the words did. That terrible expression of professional sympathy, the careful arrangement of features that medical professionals use when they're about to destroy someone's world. Keanu watched the doctor's lips move, heard sounds that might have been words, but his mind refused to process them. Stillborn. Ava was stillborn. The umbilical cord had wrapped around her tiny neck, stealing her life before she could take her first breath. Keanu held his daughter for the first and last time in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams. She was perfect, 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a face that looked like a blend of him and Jennifer, peaceful as if she were only sleeping. He memorized every detail, knowing these memories would have to last forever, knowing he would never watch her take her first steps, never hear her say "Daddy," never walk her down an aisle or hold her children in his arms. He didn't know a human being could feel this much pain and still survive. Patricia came as soon as she heard. She walked into that hospital room and did what she had always done. She held her son while he shattered into pieces, absorbing his grief into her own body, carrying weight that no mother should ever have to carry. She didn't offer empty platitudes or hollow reassurances. She simply held him and let him break. "I don't know how to survive this," Keanu whispered against her shoulder, his voice raw and ruined. "I don't know how to keep breathing." Patricia pulled back and looked into his eyes with an intensity that cut through his despair. "You survive it the same way I survived everything," she said firmly. "One breath at a time. 1 hour at a time. 1 day at a time. And when you can't find a reason to keep going, you borrow strength from the people who love you until you find your own again." Those words became his lifeline in the months that followed. The loss of Ava devastated both Keanu and Jennifer, but grief affects everyone differently. While Keanu retreated into silence and solitude, Jennifer spiraled into darkness. She struggled with depression, with substances, with the unbearable weight of carrying a child who never got to live. Their relationship, already strained by tragedy, began to fracture. They separated, though Keanu never stopped caring for her. He checked in regularly, made sure she had support, hoped desperately that she would find her way back to the light. He blamed himself for not being able to save her, for not knowing the right words or actions to pull her from the abyss. 18 months after Ava's death, Keanu's phone rang in the middle of the night. Jennifer was dead. A car accident. She was only 28 years old. The details blurred together. Something about a party, about driving home, about a parked car she never saw. But the details didn't matter. What mattered was that the woman he had loved, the mother of his child, was gone. Taken by the same cruel universe that had already taken so much. Keanu attended her funeral in a daze. He stood at the back, wearing sunglasses to hide eyes that had forgotten how to stop crying. Around him, people whispered about tragedy, about bad luck, about the unfairness of it all. He heard none of it. He was somewhere else entirely, a dark place inside himself where grief and guilt and unanswerable questions swirled together into something that felt like drowning. In the weeks that followed, Keanu disappeared from public life. He stopped taking calls from his agent. He stopped answering messages from friends. He sat alone in his house, surrounded by silence, wondering if there was any point in continuing. It was Patricia who pulled him back. She didn't call first. She simply showed up at his door one morning, let herself in with the key he had given her years ago, and found him sitting in darkness, unshaven and hollow-eyed. Without a word, she opened the curtains, letting sunlight flood into the room. Then she sat beside him on the couch and took his hand. "I know you want to give up," she said quietly. "I know the pain feels like it will never end. I know you're wondering what the point of everything is." Keanu didn't respond. He couldn't. "But I need you to hear something," Patricia continued, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "You are not meant to die in this darkness. You have too much left to give. Ava and Jennifer, they would not want their memory to be the thing that destroyed you. They would want you to live, to love again, to find meaning in this broken world." She paused, squeezing his hand tighter. "And I need you, Keanu. Your sister needs you. The world needs the kindness you carry inside you. Please don't let the grief win. Please keep fighting." Something in her words pierced through the numbness. Maybe it was the desperation in her voice, the raw need of a mother who had already lost too much and couldn't bear to lose her son to despair. Maybe it was the memory of all those years she had survived, all those impossible odds she had overcome, all those times she had refused to surrender. If she could keep going after everything she endured, maybe he could too. Slowly, painfully, Keanu began to rebuild. He started taking walks, letting the sunlight touch his face. He called his sister and listened to her voice, reminding himself that love still existed. He returned to work, not for fame or money, but because pretending to be other people gave him brief respites from being himself. But the grief never fully disappeared. It became a permanent resident inside him, a shadow companion that followed him through every triumph and every quiet moment. He learned to carry it, to make space for it, to honor it without letting it consume him entirely. And in the process, something unexpected happened. The pain transformed him. It softened edges that success had begun to harden. It deepened his empathy for others who were suffering. It reminded him, daily, that life was fragile and precious and not to be wasted on things that didn't matter. The man who emerged from that darkness was different from the one who entered it. He was quieter, more thoughtful, more intentional about kindness. He just didn't know yet how much the world would need exactly that kind of person. The man that pain built. Hollywood doesn't know what to do with genuine people. When Keanu Reeves returned to work after his season of grief, the industry expected the usual transformation. They expected bitterness. They expected ego. They expected the hardened shell that tragedy often creates in celebrities, that protective armor of arrogance and entitlement that keeps the world at arm's length. What they got instead was something that confused them completely. Keanu came back softer, more present, more generous with his time, his attention, his kindness. He remembered the names of crew members he had met once, years ago. He sat with background actors during lunch instead of retreating to his trailer. He asked people about their families, their dreams, their struggles, and actually listened to the answers. The stories began circulating through Hollywood like quiet whispers. On the set of The Matrix, Keanu discovered that the special effects team was being overworked and underpaid. Without telling anyone, he gave up a significant portion of his own salary, millions of dollars, so the studio could afford to pay them properly. When a journalist eventually discovered this and asked him about it, Keanu simply shrugged. "Money is the last thing I think about," he said. "I could live on what I've already made for the next few centuries." On another film, a set designer mentioned casually that she was struggling to pay rent. The next week, an anonymous payment covered 6 months of her housing. She never found out it was Keanu until years later, when someone accidentally let it slip. During the filming of Speed, a young production assistant spilled coffee on Keanu's shirt moments before an important scene. The assistant was terrified, certain he would be fired, certain the famous actor would explode with rage. Instead, Keanu laughed, helped clean up the mess himself, and spent the next hour telling the assistant stories about all the times he had made embarrassing mistakes as a struggling young actor in Los Angeles. By the end of the day, they were friends. These weren't publicity stunts. There were no cameras present, no press releases issued. Keanu simply moved through the world the way his mother had taught him, treating every human being as worthy of dignity and respect, regardless of their position or power. Patricia watched her son's transformation from a distance, and something in her heart finally began to heal. She had spent decades worrying about him. Not about his career, she knew he had talent. Not about his finances, she knew he was responsible. What kept her awake at night was the fear that life would harden him, that the combination of abandonment and loss would calcify into cynicism and coldness. She had seen it happen to so many people. Pain has a way of closing hearts, building walls, turning soft souls into sharp weapons. But Keanu had gone the other direction. Instead of becoming less human, he had become more human. Instead of protecting himself from the world's cruelty, he had opened himself further, pouring his wounded heart into random acts of kindness that most people would never witness or acknowledge. During one of their weekly phone calls, Patricia finally told him how proud she was, really told him, with the kind of raw honesty that mothers often save for deathbeds and final moments. "Keanu, I need you to know something," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "When you were born, I had so many fears. I was young and broke and alone, and I didn't know if I could give you what you needed. I spent years wondering if I was doing enough, being enough, teaching you the right things." She paused, gathering herself. "But watching who you've become, watching how you treat people, how you carry your pain, how you choose kindness even when the world gives you every excuse to be cruel, I realize that somehow, despite all my mistakes and limitations, something went right. You are the man I hoped you would become. And that means more to me than anything I've ever accomplished." Keanu was silent for a long moment, tears streaming down his face in his empty house. "Everything I am," he finally said, "is because of you. Every good instinct, every moment of compassion, every time I choose love over hate, it's all you. You're the voice in my head, Mom. You always have been." The years that followed brought new successes, new challenges, and the gradual accumulation of a reputation unlike any other in Hollywood. Keanu Reeves became known not for scandals or controversies or the usual celebrity drama, but for something almost unheard of in that world: genuine, consistent, unremarkable goodness. Fans began compiling lists of his random acts of kindness on the internet. The time he gave up his subway seat for a woman carrying heavy bags. The time he waited in line at his own premiere because he didn't want to cut ahead of fans. The time he spent hours taking photos and signing autographs for every single person who asked, never rushing, never showing impatience. The time he comforted a crying child who was scared of a crowd, getting down on his knees to speak at eye level, making the child laugh before gently guiding them back to their parents. Journalists began asking him about it, trying to understand what made him different. His answers were always simple and slightly uncomfortable, as if the attention embarrassed him. "I don't think I'm special," he said in one interview. "I just try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated. The way my mother treated people. It's not complicated." But of course, it was complicated. In a world that rewards selfishness and punishes vulnerability, choosing kindness day after day, year after year, requires a kind of courage that most people never develop. It requires deciding, consciously and repeatedly, that the pain you carry will not become the pain you inflict on others. It requires metabolizing grief into grace, transforming wounds into wisdom, using your scars as reminders of what matters rather than excuses for cruelty. Keanu had learned these lessons from watching his mother survive the impossible with her humanity intact. Now he was teaching them to the world without even realizing it. As Patricia grew older, Keanu made sure she wanted for nothing. The woman who had once counted coins on a kitchen table now lived in comfort, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that her sacrifices had not been in vain. Keanu visited whenever he could, sitting with her for hours, listening to stories he had heard 100 times before but never tired of hearing. Sometimes they would look through old photographs together, faded images of a young Patricia holding a baby Keanu in Beirut, pictures from their years of wandering through different countries, snapshots from film sets where Patricia had worked as a costume designer. Each photograph was a chapter in a story of survival, resilience, and unconditional love. "Do you remember this one?" Patricia would ask, pointing to a photo of Keanu at his first school play, wearing a costume she had sewn by hand from scraps of fabric. "Of course I remember," Keanu would reply. "I was terrified. I forgot half my lines." "But you didn't quit," Patricia would say, smiling. "You kept going. You've always kept going." That was their shared legacy. Not fame or money or any of the external markers of success that the world values so highly. Their legacy was simpler and more profound: the ability to keep going, to keep loving, to keep choosing hope even when despair seemed like the only reasonable option. When interviewers asked Keanu about his philosophy of life, he often quoted something his mother had told him during one of his darkest moments. "Grief changes shape, but it never really ends," he would say, his eyes distant with memory. "But neither does love. The people we lose stay with us. They become part of who we are. And the best way to honor them is to live, really live, with kindness and purpose and gratitude for every moment we are given." Those words carried the weight of everything Patricia had taught him, everything she had shown him through her example, everything she had built inside him brick by brick over decades of sacrifice and devotion. He was no longer the abandoned boy wondering why his father had left. He was no longer the grieving father holding his stillborn daughter. He was no longer the broken man sitting in darkness, wondering if life was worth continuing. He was Keanu Reeves, imperfect, wounded, still carrying shadows of loss that would never fully fade, but also kind, generous, present, and profoundly alive. And he had his mother to thank for all of it. The legacy of love. The bond between Keanu Reeves and Patricia Taylor is not a story with a dramatic ending. It's a story that continues, quietly, beautifully, away from cameras and headlines, in weekly phone calls and family dinners and small moments of connection that no audience will ever witness. It's a story written in the language of inside jokes and shared memories, and the comfortable silence that only exists between people who truly know each other. When Keanu stands on red carpets today, smiling that slightly awkward smile, answering the same questions he's answered 1,000 times before, Patricia is there with him in spirit. Her voice echoes in his mind every time he chooses patience over frustration, kindness over indifference, generosity over greed. When he takes time to speak with every fan, to treat every person with respect regardless of their status, he is channeling lessons learned in cramped apartments and hospital waiting rooms and midnight conversations that shaped the architecture of his soul. The world sees Keanu Reeves as an anomaly, a genuinely good person in an industry notorious for destroying goodness. They write articles about him, make memes celebrating his humility, wonder aloud what makes him so different from other celebrities. But the answer has always been simple. The answer is a working-class English girl who found herself pregnant and abandoned in Beirut, who chose courage over despair, who worked her fingers raw to build a life for her children, who taught her son through daily example that kindness is not weakness and love is not a transaction. The answer is Patricia Taylor. In interviews, Keanu rarely discusses his relationship with his mother in depth. Some things are too precious to share with strangers, too sacred to reduce to sound bites and headlines. But occasionally, when the conversation turns to family and legacy and what matters most, his eyes soften and his voice drops and something real emerges from behind the movie star facade. "Everything good in me came from her," he says simply. "I'm just trying to live up to her example." Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of their story. Not that pain can be avoided, it can't. Not that loss can be prevented, it can't. But that love, real love, creates something indestructible. It builds foundations that hold even when everything else collapses. It plants seeds that bloom decades later in unexpected gardens. Patricia gave her son everything she had. In return, he became a man who gives everything to others, not for recognition or reward, but because that's simply who he is. The cycle of abandonment that began with his father ended with him. The pattern of pain transformed into a pattern of compassion. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because a mother refused to let circumstances define her children's futures. It happened because she showed up, day after day, year after year, teaching through action what words alone could never convey. Today, when Keanu Reeves walks through the world spreading small acts of kindness that will never make headlines, he carries Patricia with him. She is in his patience with strangers, his generosity with colleagues, his gentleness with fans who are nervous to meet him. She is in his refusal to become bitter despite everything he has lost, his choice to remain soft in a world that rewards hardness. She is in everything good he does. And somewhere, whether in phone calls or visits or simply in the quiet knowledge that her son became the man she hoped he would be, Patricia Taylor knows that her life's work was not in vain. The costumes she sewed have long since been worn and forgotten. The movies she worked on have faded into archives. But the person she built, the son she raised with nothing but love and determination and unshakable faith, continues to touch millions of lives around the world. That is her true legacy. Not fabric and thread, but flesh and blood and a heart that learned to stay open even when closing would have been so much easier. The story of Keanu Reeves and his mother is not a fairy tale. It doesn't end with happily ever after because real life doesn't work that way. Loss continues. Pain persists. The shadows never fully disappear. But love persists too. Kindness persists. The choice to be good, to be present, to be human in a world that often seems designed to crush humanity, that persists as well. And as long as Keanu Reeves continues to move through the world carrying his mother's lessons in his heart, as long as he continues to treat strangers with dignity and choose compassion over convenience, Patricia Taylor's story continues too. Not as a chapter in someone else's biography, but as a living, breathing legacy that proves the most important truth of all. A mother's love, given freely and completely, can shape not just a life, but a soul. And that soul, in turn, can illuminate the entire world.